The dirt on my wife Lucinda's grave wasn't even dry yet when my son-in-law Brent locked the front gate in my face. It was 10 degrees below zero in Chicago, and he left me on the curb with 2 garbage bags and a smirk. He thought he had buried me along with my wife. He thought I was just a senile old man with nowhere to go. But he didn't know about the hollow heel and Lucinda's favorite pair of red stilettos. He didn't know about the silver key hidden inside or the 36 videos waiting in a high-security vault that would turn his perfect life into a living hell. I am Victor, 68 years old, a retired railway engineer who spent 40 years building foundations that wouldn't crack under pressure. I thought I had built a family just as strong. I was wrong. Before I tell you how I dismantled my son-in-law's empire piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you. The ride back from the cemetery was a masterclass in suffocation. The interior of the hired limousine smelled of expensive leather and dying lilies. Outside, the Chicago winter was doing its best to bury the city in gray slush, but inside the air was colder. I sat facing rearward, my back to the driver, looking at the 2 people who were now my only family. My daughter Jasmine sat in the corner, her face turned toward the tinted window. She was 32 years old, but in that moment she looked like a frightened child. She was twisting her wedding ring round and round her finger, a nervous tic she had developed over the last 5 years of her marriage. She wouldn't look at me. Not once since the casket was lowered had she met my eyes. Opposite me sat Brent, my son-in-law, a man who wore $3,000 suits but had a soul you could buy at a discount store. He wasn't grieving, he was working. His thumbs flew across the screen of his latest iPhone, the soft tap-tap-tap sound echoing in the silent cabin like water dripping on a prisoner's forehead. Tap-tap-tap. It was rhythmic, relentless, disrespectful. "Put the phone away," I said, my voice sounding rusty even to my own ears. It was the first time I had spoken since the eulogy. Brent didn't even look up. He just smirked, his eyes still glued to a spreadsheet of stock prices. "The market doesn't stop for death, Victor. Besides, someone has to pay for this extravagant funeral you insisted on. Lucinda would have been fine with a pine box, but you had to have mahogany." I felt the anger rise in my chest, a familiar tightening that my doctor had warned me about, but I pushed it down. I looked at Jasmine, waiting for her to defend her mother's memory, waiting for her to tell her husband to show a shred of decency. She just pulled her coat tighter around herself and fogged up the glass with her breath. Silence. That was Jasmine's contribution to my life lately. Absolute cowardly silence. The car slowed down. We were approaching the house. My house. The 2-story colonial in Lincoln Park that Lucinda and I had bought 30 years ago. The house where we raised Jasmine. The house where Lucinda had taken her last breath in the master bedroom just 3 days ago. But the limo didn't turn into the driveway. It stopped right at the curb next to the heavy iron security gates. "Driver," I said, leaning forward, "you can pull in. The code is 4921. The partition glass slid down. The driver, a thick-necked man who looked more like a bouncer than a chauffeur, looked at Brent in the rearview mirror. "Not me. Stay here," Brent said. The lock on the door clicked. Brent opened it and stepped out into the biting wind. He didn't offer me a hand. He didn't hold the door. He just stood on the sidewalk and gestured for me to get out. I stepped out, my dress shoes sinking into the freezing slush. The cold air hit my lungs like broken glass. Jasmine stayed in the warm car. "Why are we stopping here?" I asked, reaching for the door handle to help Jasmine out. "Leave her," Brent said. His voice was flat, businesslike. He walked around to the trunk, popped it open, and hauled out 2 large black duffel bags. He dropped them on the wet pavement with a wet thud. "What is this?" I looked at the bags. Those were my old travel bags. "This is your stuff," Victor, Brent said, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. "Well, the essentials anyway. Clothes, toiletries, your blood pressure meds. I packed them myself this morning while you were crying over the coffin. Very efficient." I stared at him, my brain trying to process the data, but the logic didn't fit. "I don't understand. Let's go inside. It's freezing." "You can't go inside, Victor. You don't live here anymore." I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "It's my house, Brent. Get out of my way." "Is it?" Brent reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to me. He just held it up. "Do you recognize this?" I squinted through my fogged glasses. It was the deed transfer. 6 months ago, Lucinda was sick. The medical bills were piling up. "You told us we needed to protect the assets from the state," I said. You said if I signed the house over to a trust managed by you and Jasmine, we could avoid inheritance tax. You said it was a temporary measure to protect the family. Brent smiled, a shark showing its teeth. It was a measure to protect the family, Victor. My family. Me and Jasmine. And it worked perfectly. The house belongs to the Horizon Trust now, and as the sole executor of that trust, I have decided that having a geriatric roommate doesn't fit our lifestyle. He took a step back closer to the gate. We are selling the house, Victor. The market is hot. We are moving to a penthouse downtown. No room for you. You lied to me, I whispered. I looked at the car. Jasmine, I yelled. Jasmine, do you hear this? He is kicking me out. The window of the limo lowered just an inch. I saw Jasmine's tear-streaked face. I am sorry, Daddy, she sobbed, her voice barely audible over the wind. Brent says it is for the best. He says you need professional care. We can't take care of you. You are getting confused lately. I am not confused, I roared, stepping toward the car. I am an engineer. My mind is sharper than this crook's will ever be. The driver stepped out, blocking my path. He was a foot taller than me and 50 pounds heavier. Back off, old man. The driver grunted. Brent tapped the keypad on the gate. The heavy iron bars clicked and the magnetic lock engaged with a finality that sounded like a gunshot. I have called an Uber for you, Brent said, checking his watch. It will take you to St. Mary's nursing home on the south side. It is paid for through the end of the month. After that, well, you have your pension. Don't spend it all on candy. He got back into the limo. The window rolled up. I watched my daughter turn her head away one last time. The car pulled away, splashing gray slush onto my trousers, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk of the home I had built with my own hands. The Uber arrived 10 minutes later. It was a beat-up Honda Civic that smelled of stale cigarettes. I didn't go to St. Mary's. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the dying, a place where people went to rot in urine-soaked sheets. I wasn't ready to rot. Take me to the Motel 6 on Cicero Avenue, I told the driver. The motel room was a small box with peeling yellow wallpaper and a carpet that felt sticky under my shoes. It cost me $60 a night. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, still in my funeral suit. The silence here was different than in the limo. It was the silence of hitting rock bottom. I looked at the 2 duffel bags. My entire life reduced to 60 pounds of luggage. I unzipped the side pocket of the larger bag. Inside, wrapped in a silk scarf, was the only thing I had managed to grab from Lucinda's closet before the funeral. Her red stilettos. She had bought them in Paris for our 30th anniversary. She loved them because they made her feel tall, powerful. I held one shoe in my hands, tracing the smooth leather. I missed her so much it felt like a physical hole in my chest. Don't trust them, Vic. Her voice was in my head, clear as a bell. It was something she had whispered to me in the hospital 2 days before the end. The morphine had made her groggy, and I had dismissed it as a hallucination. Check the red shoes, Vic. The right heel. I had it modified. I looked at the shoe in my hand. It was the right one. I turned it over. The heel looked solid. But Lucinda was a woman of details. She was a forensic accountant before she retired. She didn't say things for no reason. I went to the small table by the window and grabbed the complimentary fruit knife from the tray of plastic-wrapped apples I had bought at a gas station. It was dull, but it would work. With trembling hands, I jammed the tip of the knife into the rubber sole of the heel. I twisted. Pried. Snap. The rubber cap popped off. My breath caught in my throat. The heel wasn't solid wood. It had been hollowed out. Inside the small cavity, wrapped tightly in plastic wrap, was a silver object. I pulled it out. It was a heavy magnetic key card. Not for a door, but for something else. Etched into the metal were just 2 words, Unit 309. And on the back, a series of numbers that looked like an address for a high-security storage facility downtown. I sat there, the silver card cold against my palm. The grief that had been paralyzing me 10 minutes ago began to shift. It was being replaced by something else. Adrenaline. Lucinda hadn't just left me shoes. She had left me a map. My phone buzzed. A text from Brent. Hope you are settling in at St. Mary's. Don't try to come back. I have changed the codes. Rest in peace, Victor. I looked at the text. Then I looked at the key card. I stood up and walked to the dirty mirror hanging over the dresser. The old man looking back at me was tired. His eyes were red. His suit was rumpled. But the slump in his shoulders, was gone. Rest in peace. No Brent. I put the key card in my pocket. The war has just begun. The address etched on the back of the silver key card led me to the heart of the financial district. It was ironic, really. Just hours ago, I had been sleeping in a motel that smelled of mildew and despair, and now I was standing in front of the vault, a fortress of steel and glass that charged more for a square foot of storage than most people paid for their mortgage. The wind whipped around the skyscrapers, cutting through my thin coat, but I did not shiver. My body was numb, but my mind was starting to wake up. I walked up to the main entrance. The glass doors were 12 feet high and polished to a mirror shine. I saw my reflection, and I almost turned away. I looked like a vagrant. My funeral suit was wrinkled and stained with salt from the slush. My eyes were bloodshot. I had a 2-day shadow of gray stubble on my chin. I was a ghost haunting a palace of wealth. A security guard in a fitted blazer stepped out from behind the marble concierge desk. He looked me up and down with the practiced disdain of someone who spent his life guarding other people's money. "Can I help you, sir?" His tone suggested that the only help he wanted to offer was directions to the nearest homeless shelter. I did not say a word. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver key card. I held it up. The light from the lobby chandelier caught the metal. The guard stopped. He looked at the card and then he looked at me. His expression shifted from arrogance to confusion. That was a platinum access card. It was reserved for the highest tier of clients, the ones who didn't just store furniture, but stored secrets. He stepped back and gestured to the elevator bank. "Third floor, Unit 309. I walked past him, my wet shoes squeaking on the pristine marble floor. I felt like an intruder in my own life. The elevator was silent and smelled of vanilla. As the numbers climbed, I felt a tightness in my chest. What was Lucinda doing here? We shared everything. We shared bank accounts. We shared passwords. We shared the grief of losing our parents and the joy of raising Jasmine. Or so I thought. The elevator doors slid open. The hallway was climate-controlled and lined with brushed steel doors. It was quiet, a tomb for expensive things. I walked down the corridor counting the numbers, 305, 307, 309. I stood in front of the door. It looked like the entrance to a bank vault. There was no keyhole, just a sleek black panel. I held the silver card up to the reader. The light turned from red to green. A heavy mechanical thud echoed from inside the wall, followed by the hiss of a hydraulic seal breaking. The door swung open. I expected to see boxes. I expected to see stacks of cash or maybe jewelry she had inherited and never told me about. I stepped inside and the motion sensor lights flickered on overhead. I froze. The room was freezing cold, much colder than the hallway. The air was dry and smelled of ozone and hot electronics. It was not a storage unit. It was a command center. Along the back wall floor-to-ceiling server racks were humming with a low, aggressive drone. Blue and green LED lights blinked in a chaotic rhythm, processing data at a speed I could not comprehend. In the center of the room was a single desk made of glass, with 3 high-definition monitors and an ergonomic chair that looked like it had never been sat in. I walked forward, my legs trembling. This was thousands of dollars of equipment, maybe tens of thousands. Where did Lucinda get the money for this? She was a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm. She was the woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent on Sunday mornings. She was the woman who knitted blankets for our grandchildren that never came. "Who are you, Lucinda?" I whispered to the empty room. I touched the sleek black casing of the main server tower. As an engineer, I recognized the setup. This was not for storing family photos. This was for mining data or hosting secure networks. This was military-grade encryption hardware. My wife had a secret life. The realization hit me harder than the cold. Did she not trust me? Was she working for someone else? Was she a criminal? I sat down in the chair. It groaned under my weight. The center monitor woke up instantly. It did not ask for a password. It just displayed a single dialog box in the center of a black screen. Scan biometric. There was a fingerprint scanner built into the glass desk. I stared at it. She knew I would be the one to come here. She knew I would be the only one to find the key in her shoe. I pressed my right thumb against the glass. Access granted. Hello, Victor. The text appeared on the screen and my heart stopped. Seeing my name there felt like she was in the room with me. The 3 screens flashed white and then settled on a desktop interface. There were no icons, no folders, just a grid of video thumbnails, 36 of them, all labeled with dates. The first one was dated 2 weeks ago, 3 days before she went into the coma. I moved the mouse. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely control the cursor. I clicked on video 1. The video player expanded to fill the center screen. Lucinda appeared. She was sitting in this very chair wearing her favorite yellow cardigan, the one she wore when she felt cold. Her face was pale and there were dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was sharp. She looked straight into the camera lens, which meant she was looking straight at me. "Hello, Vic." Her voice filled the small room, coming from hidden surround sound speakers. Hearing it was like being stabbed in the gut. I reached out to touch the screen, but my hand hit cold glass. "If you are watching this, it means I am gone, and it means you found the key. I knew you would. You always paid attention to the details, unlike the rest of them." She took a deep breath on the video, and I saw her wince in pain. "I don't have much time, Vic, so I have to be direct. I didn't die of natural causes. My heart didn't just give out. I stopped breathing. The hum of the server seemed to vanish. Brent killed me." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible. He didn't use a gun or a knife, he used my medicine. For the last 6 months, ever since he moved into the house to help take care of me, he has been swapping my heart medication for placebos and low-dose digitals, just enough to weaken my heart muscle slowly so it would look like natural failure. I stared at the screen, horror flooding my veins. I remembered how helpful Brent had been. "I will get Mom's pills." "Victor, you rest. I will sort out the pharmacy refill, Victor." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. "I found out 2 months ago," Lucinda continued. "I ran a toxicology screen on myself at the old lab, but I couldn't go to the police, Vic. I couldn't tell you. Not yet, because Jasmine is involved." "Number 1, I whispered. "Not Jasmine. She signed the papers, Vic. She signed the power of attorney that gave Brent control over my medical decisions. If I went to the police, Brent would throw her under the bus. He has set it up so she looks like the accomplice. He would let our daughter go to prison to save himself. I couldn't let that happen, so I built this." She gestured to the room around her. "I spent the last of my savings and liquidated my retirement account to build this system. I have been tracking him, Vic. I have been recording everything. Every phone call, every email, every bank transfer. I have 36 videos prepared for you. Each one is a mission. Each one unlocks the next. You are going to dismantle his life, Vic. You are going to take back our house, our money, and our daughter." On the screen, Lucinda leaned forward. Her eyes were fierce. "Your first mission starts now. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Brent is going to the First National Bank to drain our joint savings account. He thinks you are weak. He thinks you are broken." She smiled a sad, tired smile. "Show him he is wrong. Go to the bank. Stop the transfer. Use the clause in our original account contract from 1985. I have uploaded the document to the printer to your left." The printer in the corner whirred to life and spat out a single sheet of paper. I took the paper. My hands were no longer shaking. "Vic," she said, her voice softening, "I know you are hurting. I know you are crying right now. Wipe your face. You can grieve later. Right now, I need you to be the engineer. I need you to fix this." The video froze on her face. Then a final line of text appeared at the bottom of the screen. "Mission 1 active." I looked at my wife's face one last time. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the rough sleeve of my coat. She was right. I had spent 40 years building bridges and tunnels. I knew how to spot a structural weakness. And Brent had just created a massive crack in his foundation. I stood up. The cold in the room didn't bother me anymore. I felt a fire burning in my chest, hot and dangerous. "I am not crying anymore, Lucinda." I grabbed the document from the printer. "I am going to the bank." I stood before the cracked, full-length mirror in the motel room and made a decision that would have confused anyone watching. I took off my funeral suit. It was the only respectable thing I owned, but respect was not the weapon I needed today. I needed pity. I needed invisibility. I dug into the bottom of the duffel bag and pulled out an old gray wool sweater that Lucinda had been begging me to throw away for 5 years. It had a hole in the left elbow and smelled of mothballs and old cedar. I pulled on a pair of stained corduroy trousers that I used for gardening. I didn't shave. I didn't comb the gray stubble on my head. I wanted to look exactly like what Brent said I was, a confused, broken old man who had lost his mind along with his wife. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is deception. If your enemy is arrogant, you must encourage his arrogance. If he thinks you are weak, you must appear weaker. Brent was a man who saw the world through the lens of appearances. To him, a man in a $3,000 suit was a king, and a man in a torn sweater was a peasant. He would look at me and see a nuisance, not a threat. He would never suspect that inside the lining of my coat was the document Lucinda had printed for me. He would never suspect that the mind behind these tired red eyes was calculating the structural failure of his entire financial existence. I checked the time on my cheap wristwatch. It was 8:45 a.m. The First National Bank opened in 15 minutes. The temperature outside was 5 degrees, but I didn't feel the cold. The fire in my chest was burning hotter than a furnace. I stepped out of the motel room and began the long walk to the financial district. I walked with a slight limp that I didn't actually have. I let my shoulders slump. I was playing a role. I was the ghost of Victor the engineer. But inside I was fully operational. I was a machine coming to dismantle a glitch. The lobby of the First National Bank was a cathedral of capitalism. The ceilings were 30 feet high, supported by marble pillars that looked like they had been stolen from Rome. The air smelled of floor wax and money. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that commands you to whisper. I saw him immediately. Brent was standing at the VIP counter, leaning casually against the polished granite. He looked like he owned the place. He was wearing a navy blue Italian suit that fit him perfectly, and he was laughing at something the young female teller was saying. I watched him for a moment from the revolving doors. He looked so comfortable. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. And in his mind, he had. He thought he was minutes away from transferring $500,000 of my life savings into his private offshore account. He was flirting with the teller, a blonde woman with a headset, likely charming her into expediting the transfer. I took a deep breath. It was time to make an entrance. I shuffled across the marble floor, my old shoes making a scuffing sound that echoed in the silence. A security guard near the door took one look at my sweater and took a step forward. He put a hand on his belt, not reaching for a weapon, but signaling his authority. "Sir," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Sir, you cannot be in here if you are looking for a restroom." I ignored him. I kept my eyes locked on Brent's back. I kept walking. The guard stepped into my path, blocking my way. I stopped and looked up at him. "I am here to see a teller," I said, my voice raspy. "I have an account here." The guard looked skeptical, but before he could grab my arm, Brent turned around. The smile on his face vanished, instantly replaced by a look of pure disgust. "Victor," he hissed loud enough for the teller to hear. "What the hell are you doing here?" The guard looked at Brent. "You know this man, Mr. Sterling?" "Unfortunately, yes," Brent said, walking over to me. "He is my father-in-law. He is having a hard time. He is confused." He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. "Go back to the motel, Victor. I told you I would send you a stipend next week. You don't need to be here begging." I didn't back down. I didn't look at the floor. I looked past him at the teller. "My name is Victor King," I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard over the hum of the air conditioning. "I am the co-owner of the account ending in 4599, and I am here to exercise my right of refusal." Brent laughed. It was a nervous sound. Right of refusal. "Victor, you don't even know what day it is. Go outside before I call the police and have you taken to the ward myself." He turned to the teller. "I am so sorry about this. Please proceed with the transfer. He is not mentally competent." The teller looked uncertain. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. I reached into my coat pocket. Brent flinched, thinking maybe I had a weapon, but I only pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper. It was the document Lucinda had prepared. It was a copy of the original account agreement we had signed 30 years ago, long before online banking, long before Brent was even born. I slammed the paper onto the granite counter. The sound was like a gunshot. "Read Clause 4B, I said, my voice suddenly losing its wobble. It was the voice of the chief engineer. Clear, authoritative. "Read it." The teller picked up the paper. She adjusted her glasses. Her eyes widened as she read the highlighted paragraph. "It says here that for any transfer exceeding $10,000 from the joint trust, both signatories must be physically present and provide biometric verification. If one party contests the transfer, the account is automatically placed in a 48-hour fraud audit." She looked up at Brent. Her face was pale. "Mr. Sterling, is this true? Does Mr. King contest this transfer?" Brent turned purple. "That is an old contract. We updated the terms when Lucinda got sick. I have power of attorney." He pointed a finger at my face. "This man is senile. His signature is worthless. The power of attorney applies to medical decisions, I said, cutting him off. This is a financial trust, and unless you have a court order declaring me legally dead, I am still the owner of this money. I looked the teller in the eye. Freeze the account, now. The teller looked at the security guard, then at Brent, then at me. She saw the fire in my eyes. She typed a command into her keyboard. A red box flashed on her screen. I am sorry, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice trembling. The system has flagged the transaction. The account is locked pending an internal audit. I cannot move the funds. The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the servers seemed to get louder. Brent stood there frozen. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax statue. The $500,000 he needed to cover his bad debts to pay off the sharks he owed was now just pixels on a screen he couldn't touch. Then the rage took over. The mask of the civilized businessman cracked and the monster underneath clawed its way out. Brent lunged at me. He grabbed the lapels of my moth-eaten sweater and slammed me back against the marble pillar. You stupid old fool, he screamed, spit flying into my face. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have killed us both. I need that money today. The security guard rushed forward, shouting for him to let go, but I didn't struggle. I let him shake me. I let him show the cameras and the witnesses exactly who he was. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I leaned forward so only he could hear me. I dropped the act of the confused old man completely. I whispered the words Lucinda had told me to say, the words that would let him know this wasn't an accident. Lucinda says, "Hello, Brent." His eyes went wide. His grip on my sweater loosened. It was as if I had punched him in the throat. He stared at me in horror, trying to process what I had just said. "Lucinda is dead," he whispered, his voice shaking. I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "Are you sure about that?" I asked. "Because she seems to be freezing your assets from the grave." The security guard pulled him off me. Brent stumbled back, looking at his hands, looking at me, looking at the teller who was already on the phone with the police. He looked like a man waking up from a nightmare, only to realize the nightmare was real. I straightened my old sweater. I brushed the imaginary dust off my shoulder. I didn't look back at him. I turned to the teller who was staring at me with a mix of fear and respect. "Have a nice day, ma'am," I said. I walked out of the bank and back into the cold Chicago wind. My limp was gone. My head was high. The first brick of his empire had just been smashed to dust, and I was just getting started. I walked back into the freezing cold of Unit 309 with my heart still racing from the confrontation at the bank. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place was a cold, hard knot of anger. I sat down in the ergonomic chair and the sensors read my vitals. The screens woke up instantly. I did not waste time. I clicked on Video 2. The center monitor flickered and showed a timestamp from 3 months ago. The camera angle was from the motion sensor in the smoke detector of my living room ceiling. I watched in silence as the front door opened. Brent walked in. He was not alone. A woman walked in behind him. She was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair extensions and a dress that cost more than my first car. I recognized her immediately. It was Tiffany, his executive assistant, the one Jasmine called a close friend. I watched them pour drinks from my crystal decanter. I watched them sit on the sofa where I used to read the newspaper. I watched Brent kiss her neck while my daughter was at work and my wife was dying in the bedroom upstairs. I felt bile rise in my throat. My hand instinctively went to my pocket for my phone. I wanted to record this. I wanted to send it to Jasmine right now. I wanted to drive to the house and break down the door. "Stop, Vic." Lucinda's voice cut through the air from the recorded video on the left screen. She knew me too well. She had anticipated my reaction down to the second. "Put the phone away. Do not call Jasmine. Not yet." I looked at Lucinda's face on the screen. She looked tired, but her eyes were steely. "If you show Jasmine this video now, she will not believe it. She is in denial, Vic. She will think it is a deep fake, or she will make excuses for him. Brent has gaslit her for years. She thinks she is the problem. She thinks she is not good enough. If you show her this, she will just cry and he will talk his way out of it. He will say it was a moment of weakness. He will say he was stressed about my illness." Lucinda leaned closer to the camera lens. "We do not want an apology, Vic. We want destruction. We need Tiffany to blow up his life for us. We need her to walk into that house and claim him in front of everyone. We need to make her think she has won so she destroys him completely." The printer whirred to life again. It spat out a single sheet of cardstock. It was an invitation design. Elegant. Expensive. "You are going to deliver a gift, Vic. You are going to make Tiffany think that Brent is finally ready to leave Jasmine. I picked up the paper. It was an invitation to the party Brent was hosting tonight, the party that was supposed to celebrate my eviction. I spent the next hour preparing for my role. I was no longer Victor King, the retired engineer. I was a courier, a nobody. I went to a discount store 3 blocks away and bought a generic blue vest and a clipboard. I found a cardboard box in a recycling bin and lined it with velvet from an old scarf I had in my duffel bag. Inside the box, I placed the bait. It was a ring I had found in Lucinda's jewelry box in the unit. It was a flashy costume piece, a cubic zirconia that shone like a diamond under the lights. It looked exactly like the kind of tacky, expensive thing Brent would buy. I wrote the note myself, imitating Brent's jagged handwriting, which I had seen on 1,000 bad checks. Wear this tonight. I am finally ready to tell everyone. I love you. B. I took a bus to the Gold Coast district where Tiffany lived. Her building was a fortress of glass and steel called the Pinnacle. It had a doorman and security cameras covering every inch of the lobby. But I knew something about buildings like this. I had designed the ventilation systems for half of them in the 90s. They all had a blind spot. I walked to the service entrance around the back. There was a camera pointed at the loading dock, but it had a fixed angle. If I hugged the wall and moved quickly during the 3-second rotation interval, I would be invisible. I waited. 1, 2, 3. I moved. I pressed my back against the cold brick. The camera whirred past me, scanning empty space. I slipped through the service door when a catering crew came out. I walked with my head down, looking at my clipboard. In a high-visibility vest, you become part of the furniture. People do not see you. They see a function. I walked right past the security desk. The guard was watching a football game on his phone. I took the service elevator to the 20th floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I walked down the plush carpeted hallway to apartment 204. I placed the box on the doormat. I did not knock. I pressed the doorbell and walked away quickly, turning the corner just as I heard the latch click open. I did not wait to see her face. I did not need to. I had a better vantage point. I returned to Unit 309 an hour later. I sat down at the desk, and Lucinda's system was already 1 step ahead of me. On the right monitor, a social media feed was scrolling. It was Tiffany's private Instagram account, which Lucinda had somehow gained access to. And there it was, a photo posted 10 minutes ago. It showed her hand with the fake diamond ring on her finger. The caption read, "He finally chose me. Best night of my life starts now. Hashtag soulmate. Hashtag no more secrets." I leaned back in the chair and watched the likes roll in. She had swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. She thought she was the guest of honor. She thought she was walking into a fairy tale. She had no idea she was walking into a firing squad. I looked at the invitation I had kept for myself. The party started at 7 p.m. Brent had invited 50 of his most important investors and clients. He wanted to show off his perfect life. He wanted to show off his beautiful, obedient wife and his new house. Instead, he was going to get a collision of 2 worlds that would leave nothing standing. I stood up and went to the small sink in the corner of the unit. I shaved off my stubble. I washed my face with cold water. I put my funeral suit back on. It was still wrinkled, but I brushed it off as best I could. "It is time to crash a party, Lucinda," I said to the empty room. I locked the heavy steel door of Unit 309 behind me. The silver key felt warm in my pocket. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. Tonight, the cold of Chicago would feel like a tropical breeze compared to the storm that was about to hit Brent's living room. I stood on the sidewalk across the street from the house that I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. It was 7 in the evening and the snow had stopped falling, leaving the air crisp and clear. The windows of my home were glowing with a warm golden light that spilled out onto the manicured lawn. It looked like a postcard of the American dream. It looked like a place where a happy family lived. But I knew the truth. That house was a stage set, and inside the actors were performing a lie. From where I stood in the shadows, I could see the silhouettes of the guests moving past the curtains. There were caterers in white jackets carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. I could hear the faint sound of jazz music drifting out into the cold night. It was Miles Davis. Brent did not know the first thing about jazz, but he knew that rich people listened to it, so he played it. It was just another prop. I pulled out my smartphone and opened the app that connected to the security cameras inside the house. Lucinda had given me eyes everywhere. On the small screen, I saw the living room. It had been transformed. My old leather armchair was gone, replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable-looking modern sofa. The family photos on the mantelpiece, the ones of Jasmine's graduation and our trips to the Grand Canyon, had been taken down. In their place was a large abstract painting that looked like spilled paint. Brent was standing in the center of the room holding a crystal flute of champagne. He looked triumphant. He was laughing at a joke made by a man I recognized as his biggest investor. Brent's hand rested possessively on Jasmine's shoulder. My daughter was wearing a black cocktail dress and the pearl necklace Lucinda had left her. She was smiling, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She looked thin, frail. She was playing the part of the supportive wife, the trophy that proved Brent was a family man. It broke my heart to see her like that. She was a bird in a gilded cage too afraid to fly. The guests were the elite of Chicago. Bankers, lawyers, venture capitalists. They were eating the food bought with my life savings and drinking the wine from my cellar. They had no idea that the man whose house they were standing in was watching them from the cold street shivering in a funeral suit. They thought I was in a nursing home drooling on myself. They thought I was history. But history has a way of coming back to haunt you. I checked my watch. 7:15 p.m. A yellow taxi turned the corner and slowed down in front of the house. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it, the variable I had introduced into the equation. The taxi door opened and a pair of long legs stepped out into the snow. Even from this distance, the dress was impossible to miss. It was fire engine red tight and cut low enough to make a bishop blush. Tiffany did not look like she was going to a business mixer. She looked like she was going to the Oscars. She wrapped a white fur coat around her shoulders and strutted up the driveway. She held her head high, radiating the confidence of a woman who believes she has finally won the prize. I watched on my phone screen as the front door opened. The butler hired for the night took her coat. Underneath the red dress was even more spectacular. She adjusted the fake diamond ring on her finger, making sure it caught the light of the chandelier. She walked into the living room. I turned up the volume on my phone. The jazz music seemed to stop. The chatter of the 50 guests died down instantly. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Tiffany stood in the archway beaming. She scanned the room until her eyes locked on Brent. Brent dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Baby Tiffany cooed, her voice loud and clear. "I got your note. I am so happy you are finally ready." She walked across the room, her heels clicking on the floor. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. They were confused. They looked from Tiffany to Brent and then to Jasmine. Jasmine stood frozen. Her hand went to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with shock. Brent's face was a mask of pure terror. He stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. He looked like a deer in headlights. Tiffany reached him and threw her arms around his neck. She kissed him full on the mouth, in front of his wife, in front of his investors, in front of God and everyone. "I love the ring, baby," she said, pulling back and flashing the cubic zirconia in front of his face. "It is beautiful. I am ready to be the woman of this house." The room exploded into whispers. The investors looked at each other with raised eyebrows. This was not the image of stability Brent had sold them. This was a scandal. This was chaos. Jasmine took a step back. She looked at the ring on Tiffany's finger. Then she looked at Brent. "Who is she, Brent?" Jasmine whispered. Her voice was trembling. Brent pushed Tiffany away roughly. "Get off me. Who are you? I didn't invite you. You are crazy." Tiffany's smile faltered. She looked hurt. She pulled the invitation I had forged out of her purse. "What do you mean, baby? You sent me the invitation. You sent me the ring. You said you were going to tell her tonight. You said you were going to kick the old man out and make room for us." The mention of the old man sent a ripple through the crowd. Jasmine's face crumpled. She looked at the invitation in Tiffany's hand. She recognized her husband's handwriting, or what looked exactly like it. "Get out!" Brent screamed, his face turning purple. "Security! Get this woman out of here. She is delusional. She is a stalker." Tiffany's face hardened. The hurt was replaced by fury. A woman scorned is a dangerous thing, but a woman humiliated in a red dress is a nuclear bomb. "Stalker!" she yelled. "I have been sleeping in your bed for 6 months, Brent. I know about the mole on your back. I know about the offshore accounts." "Do not call me a stalker, you lying snake." The guests began to scramble for their coats. The party was over. The investors were shaking their heads. This was a disaster for Brent's reputation. This was my cue. I crossed the street. My stride was long and purposeful. I walked up the driveway past the shocked guests who were fleeing the scene. I walked up the steps to the front door, which was still wide open. I stepped into the hallway. The chaos in the living room was at its peak. Tiffany was throwing hors d'oeuvres at Brent. Jasmine was sobbing in the corner. I cleared my throat. The sound was deep and authoritative. "I hope I am not late for the toast," I said. Everyone turned to look at me. Brent froze. Tiffany stopped throwing shrimp. Jasmine looked up through her tears. "Daddy," she whispered. Victor, Brent hissed. "What are you doing here? I told you to get lost." I walked into the room calmly, picking up a napkin from a side table and wiping a spot of sauce off the wall. "I live here, Brent," I said simply. "No, you don't," Brent shouted. He was losing control completely. "You signed the deed. This is my house. Get out before I call the police." "Actually, I think the police are already here," I said, pointing to the flashing blue lights visible through the front window. 2 officers walked in through the open door. They looked at the shattered glass, the screaming mistress, and the old man in the suit. "Who called?" 911, one officer asked. "I did?" Brent said, stepping forward. He tried to compose himself. "These people are trespassing. That woman and this old man. I want them removed immediately. This is my private property." The officer looked at me. "Sir, is this true? Do you live here?" I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. It was the original deed transfer, but it was the full version, the one Brent had never bothered to read in detail because he was too busy counting his money. "Officer," I said, handing him the document, "my son-in-law is correct that the title of the house is held by the Horizon Trust. However, if you look at Addendum Clause 14, Section C, you will see a very specific legal provision called a lifetime usufruct." The officer squinted at the paper. "Usufruct," Brent spat. "What kind of made-up word is that?" "It is a Roman law concept," Brent, I said calmly. "It means that while you may own the title, I have the exclusive legal right to use and enjoy the property until the day I die. I can live here, I can sleep here, and I can deny entry to anyone I choose." The officer looked up from the paper. He looked at Brent. "This document looks legal, sir. It is notarized. It says, Mr. King has lifetime residency rights." "That is impossible," Brent screamed. "I never agreed to that." "You didn't read what you signed, Brent," I said, my voice cold. "You were too eager to steal my house to check the fine print. Lucinda made sure of that." The officer handed the paper back to me. "Well, Mr. Sterling, it looks like this is his house too. We cannot remove him. It is a civil matter." "But he can't stay here," Brent yelled. "Look at him. He is ruining my life." I walked over to the modern sofa and sat down. I crossed my legs and looked at the wreckage of the party. I looked at Tiffany, who was smirking at Brent's misery. I looked at Jasmine, who was looking at me with a mixture of confusion and hope. And finally, I looked at Brent. "I am not going anywhere, Brent. In fact, I think I will take the master bedroom tonight. The guest room is a bit drafty." The officer turned to Brent. "Sir, if you want to file an eviction notice, you can do that at the courthouse on Monday. But for tonight, he stays. And if you try to physically remove him, we will arrest you for assault. Do you understand?" Brent clenched his fists. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked around the room. His investors were gone. His mistress had exposed him. And his father-in-law, whom he thought he had buried, was sitting on his sofa looking like the king of the castle. "Fine," Brent spat. "Stay. Rot here for all I care. But don't think you have won, Victor. This is war." I looked at him and smiled. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards. "I know it is war, Brent, and I just took the beachhead." I picked up a cracker from the table and took a bite. It tasted like victory. My new kingdom was a 12 by 12 concrete box located directly beneath the kitchen. It used to be the coal storage room back when the house was built in the 20s. Now it was just a damp, windowless cell that smelled of mildew and old paint. There was no heating down here. The floor was raw cement that sucked the warmth right out of my bones through the soles of my shoes. My bed was a rusty cot I had found pushed behind the water heater, and my mattress was a pile of old moving blankets that smelled of dust. Upstairs, Brent and Jasmine slept on 600 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets in a room temperature controlled to a perfect 72 degrees. Down here, I could see my breath fog in the air. but I did not mind the cold. In fact, I welcomed it. The cold kept me awake. It kept me sharp. While they were living in luxury, I was living in a bunker. And as any soldier knows, the bunker is where the war is won. I spent my days listening to their footsteps on the floorboards above my head. I learned their rhythm. I knew that Brent paced in the hallway when he was on the phone with his offshore bankers. I knew that Jasmine stood by the window in the living room for hours just staring out at the street. I was the monster in their basement, the troll under the bridge, but they had no idea that I wasn't just lurking. I was working. I had set up a makeshift command center on top of an old washing machine. It was nothing compared to Unit 309, but it was enough. I had a laptop I had salvaged from my old office supplies and a directional antenna I had rigged from a wire coat hanger to steal the Wi-Fi signal from the router upstairs. I was not just a guest in this house. I was the architect of its nervous system. When we renovated the place 10 years ago, I insisted on installing the wiring myself. I knew where every cable ran. I knew where every sensor was hidden. And thanks to Lucinda, I had the administrator codes that Brent didn't even know existed. The house was about to turn against them. I opened the file labeled Video 4 on my laptop. Lucinda appeared on the screen looking weaker than in the previous videos, but her eyes were burning with a terrifying intelligence. "Vic," she said, her voice raspy, "a house is a machine, and machines can malfunction. Brent loves his smart home system. He loves controlling the lights with his voice. He loves the automated blinds. He loves feeling like a god. It is time to make him feel like a prisoner. We are going to execute a program I call the Gaslight Protocol." I followed her instructions perfectly. I accessed the central hub of the smart home system. It was designed to learn the habits of the occupants to maximize comfort. I rewrote the code to maximize distress. I started with the temperature. The human body is sensitive to thermal changes, especially during sleep. I programmed the thermostat in the master bedroom to slowly drop to 50 degrees between midnight and 2 a.m. Then at exactly 2:15 a.m. it would spike to 85 degrees. It was subtle enough not to trigger an alarm, but drastic enough to disrupt the REM cycle. Upstairs, I heard the furnace kick on with a roar. Then 20 minutes later, the air conditioner hummed to life, fighting the heat the furnace had just created. I imagined Brent tossing and turning, kicking off the covers, sweating, and then shivering. Sleep deprivation is a powerful drug. It breaks down your defenses. It makes you irritable. Paranoia sets in after just 3 nights. But temperature was just the beginning. The real weapon was sound. Lucinda had recorded everything. Not just the evidence of his crimes, but the sounds of her sickness. The dry, hacking cough that had kept us both awake for months. The sound of her dropping a pill bottle on the bathroom floor. The sound of her calling my name in a whisper. I accessed the multi-room audio system. Brent had installed high-end speakers in every room hidden in the ceilings. He used them to play jazz at his parties. I was going to use them to play a requiem. I waited until the house was dead silent. It was 3:15 a.m., the hour of the wolf, the time when the mind is most vulnerable to fear. I typed the command into the terminal. Play track cough _03, volume 15%, location master bathroom. I sat in the dark basement and waited. Upstairs through the thin floorboards I heard it, a soft, dry cough. It was quiet enough to be a hallucination, but loud enough to wake a guilty conscience. Then I heard movement. Bed springs creaking, footsteps walking quickly to the bathroom. Then silence. I waited 2 minutes. Play track bottle _drop, volume 20%, location kitchen. I heard the distinct clatter of plastic hitting tile coming from the floor above me. This time I heard Brent's voice. It was muffled but panicked. "Who is there?" he shouted. I heard him running down the stairs, heavy footsteps thudding directly over my head. I heard him tearing through the kitchen, opening cabinets, slamming drawers. I leaned back in my rusty chair and smiled. He was chasing ghosts. For the next 3 days, I waged a war of invisible terror. I randomized the lights. The hallway lights would flicker SOS in Morse code, but only for 10 seconds at a time. The coffee maker would start brewing at 4 a.m., filling the house with the smell of burning dark roast. The smart fridge would dispense ice onto the floor when no one was looking. The house was not haunted by a spirit. It was haunted by an engineer with a laptop. The effects were immediate and devastating. I saw them when I went upstairs to get water from the kitchen tap, which was the only privilege my court order allowed me. Brent looked like a walking corpse. His skin was gray and pasty. His eyes were sunken into his skull, surrounded by dark purple bruises of exhaustion. He jumped at his own shadow. His expensive suits hung loosely on his frame. Jasmine was worse. She wasn't just tired, she was terrified. She believed in the supernatural. She believed her mother was angry. I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of tap water when they came in for breakfast. They didn't even look at me. They were too busy tearing each other apart. "You changed the thermostat again, Brent," Jasmine snapped, slamming her coffee mug onto the counter. I woke up sweating. "It is like an oven in there." "I didn't touch the damn thermostat," Brent yelled back, his voice cracking. "I told you the system is glitching. I called the technician 3 times. He says everything is normal. He says we are imagining it." "Well, I am not imagining the coughing," Jasmine whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I heard her last night, Brent. I heard Mom. She was in the bathroom. She sounded like she was choking." Brent slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "Stop it, Jasmine. Your mother is dead. Dead people don't cough. It is the pipes. It is the wind. Stop acting like a child." "It is not the pipes," Jasmine screamed. "Why are you so cold? Why can't you admit that something is wrong? Maybe she knows, Brent. Maybe she knows what we did." Brent's eyes darted to me. He saw me standing by the sink, watching them calmly. "Shut up," he hissed at her. "Watch your mouth." He walked over to me, getting right in my face. He smelled of stale sweat and fear. "You are doing this, aren't you, old man? You are messing with the fuse box." I took a slow sip of my water. "I don't know what you are talking about, Brent," I said, my voice steady. "I am just a confused old man living in the basement. I barely know how to use a toaster, remember? That is what you told the judge." He stared at me, searching for a crack in my armor. He wanted to hit me. I could see it in his trembling hands. But he knew the police were watching. He knew he was on thin ice. "Fix the house, Brent," I said, walking past him toward the basement door. "Before the house fixes you." I retreated to my bunker, leaving them in the sun-filled kitchen that felt colder than any grave. I could hear them screaming at each other as I descended the stairs. They were fighting over the temperature. They were fighting over the noises. They were fighting over their own sanity. The foundation of their marriage was built on greed and lies. All I had to do was apply a little pressure, and the cracks were turning into canyons. I sat down at my laptop. I opened Video 8. Lucinda was smiling on the screen. "Good job, Vic," she said. "Now that they are exhausted, it is time to introduce the doctor." I closed the laptop. Tonight I would let them sleep for a few hours. Just enough to give them hope. Because tomorrow I was going to take that hope away and replace it with a nightmare wearing a stethoscope. I sat in the darkness of my basement bunker, watching the screen of my laptop with the intensity of a radar operator tracking an incoming missile. It was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. The house above me was quiet, but it was the silence before an ambush. Lucinda had warned me in Video 8 that this moment was coming. She called it the sanity trap. Brent was running out of options. The bank account freeze had humiliated him. The party had exposed him. The psychological warfare of the last 3 days had exhausted him. A desperate man does not fight fair. He calls for reinforcements. I heard the front door open. The heavy thud of expensive dress shoes on the hardwood floor echoed through the ceiling joists, then a second pair of footsteps. Lighter, more hesitant. I adjusted the volume on the microphone feed from the living room. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Dr. Brent's voice was smooth, dripping with that fake charm he used on investors before he robbed them blind. "My father-in-law has become unmanageable. It is heartbreaking, really. Dementia is a cruel disease." I leaned closer to the screen. The hidden camera in the smoke detector showed Brent standing in the foyer with a tall, thin man carrying a leather briefcase. The man had slicked back hair and wore a gray suit that looked sharp but cheap. He had the eyes of a shark that smelled blood in the water. "This is Dr. Ellis," I whispered to myself. Lucinda had a file on him. He wasn't a healer. He was a fixer. He was a psychiatrist who specialized in signing involuntary commitment papers for wealthy families who wanted to stash their inconvenient relatives away in private facilities. "I understand, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Ellis said. His voice was oily. "These cases are difficult. But if he is a danger to himself or others, we have a duty to intervene. I have the papers prepared. All I need is a brief evaluation to confirm his cognitive decline. Once I sign off, the ambulance can be here in 20 minutes. I watched Brent smile. It was a cruel, predatory smile. "He is definitely a danger," Brent lied. "He hallucinates. He thinks he owns this house. He hears voices. Just get him to say something crazy, doctor. I will handle the rest." I sat back in my rusty chair. So that was the play. They wanted to declare me incompetent. They wanted to strip me of my rights and lock me in a padded room where no one would listen to the rantings of a crazy old man. It was a solid plan. Against a normal victim, it would have worked perfectly. But I was not a normal victim. And I had done my homework. I opened the folder on my laptop labeled Dr. Ellis, Detroit, 2018. I scanned the PDF documents Lucinda had compiled, medical board reprimands, sealed settlements, a wrongful death suit involving a sedative overdose that had been quietly settled out of court. This man was not a doctor. He was a criminal with a prescription pad. I closed the laptop. I stood up and smoothed out the wrinkles in my sweater. I checked my reflection in the dark window of the basement. I practiced my vacant stare. I let my jaw go slack. I hunched my shoulders. It was time to give the performance of a lifetime. 5 minutes later, the basement door opened. Victor Brent called down his voice overly loud like he was talking to a child. "Come upstairs. There is someone here to see you." I walked up the stairs, slowly dragging my feet. I blinked rapidly as I stepped into the bright light of the kitchen. Brent and Dr. Ellis were sitting at the kitchen island. Jasmine was standing by the sink, looking at the floor. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She knew this was wrong, but her fear of Brent was stronger than her love for me. "Sit down," Victor Brent said, pulling out a stool. I sat down. I looked around the room with wide, confused eyes. I picked at a loose thread on my sleeve. "Who is this?" I mumbled. "Is he the plumber?" The pipes are making noise again. Brent exchanged a look with Dr. Ellis, a look that said, "See? I told you." "No, Victor," Dr. Ellis said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a silver pen. "I am a doctor. I am just here to have a friendly chat, to see how you are feeling." I stared at his pen. It was a Mont Blanc. Expensive. Too expensive for a doctor who worked out of a strip mall clinic in the suburbs. "I feel cold," I said. "The house is always cold." "Paranoia and complaints about environment, doctor," Ellis muttered, scribbling on his notepad. "Typical early-stage symptoms." He looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Victor, do you know what year it is?" I paused. I let my mouth hang open slightly. "It is the year of the rabbit," I said. Brent snorted. "See? He is gone. Totally gone." Dr. Ellis nodded. "And do you know who the president is?" I looked at Jasmine. She was crying silently. "President," I said slowly. "President Lincoln. He freed the slaves." "But we are still in chains, aren't we?" Dr. Ellis wrote furiously. "Disorientation. Delusions of historical grandeur." He looked up at Brent. "I think we have enough, Mr. Sterling. The cognitive decline is severe. He is clearly unable to care for himself. I am ready to sign the 5150 hold." Brent let out a breath he had been holding. "Finally. Do it. Get him out of here." Dr. Ellis placed a form on the counter. He uncapped his pen with a flourish. "Wait," I said. My voice changed. The tremble was gone. The confusion evaporated like mist in the morning sun. I sat up straight. I locked eyes with the doctor. "I have a question for you, doctor." Dr. Ellis stopped his pen hovering over the paper. He looked annoyed. "What is it, Victor?" I leaned forward. "Do you remember the year 2018? Dr. Ellis frowned. "Of course. Why?" "Because I seem to recall that was the year you were practicing at the Mercy General Hospital in Detroit, under your birth name, Dr. Richard Evans." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been slapped. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the marble counter. Brent looked confused. "What are you talking about, Victor?" I didn't look at Brent. I kept my eyes pinned on the doctor. I saw the sweat bead on his upper lip. I saw the panic flare in his pupils. "You left Detroit in a hurry, didn't you, doctor?" I continued, my voice cold and precise. "Right after the inquest into the death of Mrs. Higgins, the elderly patient who died of a cardiac arrest after being administered 3 times the safe dose of haloperidol. A dose you prescribed." "Victor, stop it," Brent shouted. "You are talking nonsense." "Am I asked. I turned to the doctor. "The medical board revoked your license in Michigan. You changed your name. You moved to Chicago. You forged your credentials. And now you are running a concierge service for rich people who want to dispose of their relatives." I stood up. I walked over to the counter and picked up the unsigned commitment paper. "If you sign this paper, doctor, I will send the file I have on my laptop directly to the Illinois Medical Board, and then I will send it to the district attorney. You won't just lose your license this time. You will go to prison for fraud and practicing without a license." Dr. Ellis stood up so fast his stool fell over with a crash. He was shaking. He looked at me with pure terror. He looked at the smart home camera in the corner of the ceiling, wondering how much I had recorded. I didn't know, he stammered. Mr. Sterling, you didn't tell me he was... He grabbed his briefcase. He didn't even bother to pick up his expensive pen. I can't be here. I can't be involved in this. Wait, Brent yelled. Where are you going? You haven't signed the papers. I paid you $5,000. Keep the money, Dr. Ellis shouted, running toward the front door. Just don't call me again. The front door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the house like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was heavy. Heavy with failure. Heavy with shock. Brent stood in the middle of the kitchen staring at the closed door. His plan had disintegrated in less than 2 minutes. He turned to look at me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked like a child whose toy had been snatched away. He grabbed a crystal vase from the center of the island. It was Lucinda's favorite vase, a wedding gift from her mother. You son of a bitch, Brent screamed. He hurled the vase at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Why won't you just die, he roared. Why won't you just leave us alone? I watched the glass fall to the floor. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Jasmine let out a sob and covered her ears. Brent flipped the kitchen table. Plates and coffee cups flew everywhere. He was destroying his own house. He was destroying the perfect image he had tried so hard to build. I stood there calm amidst the storm. I was the eye of the hurricane. You can break every dish in this house, Brent, I said quietly. You can scream until your throat bleeds. But you cannot break me, because I am already broken, and broken things have sharp edges. I turned around and walked back to the basement door. Clean this up, Jasmine, I said over my shoulder. We don't want the ants to come. I walked down the stairs into the darkness of my bunker. I heard Brent screaming my name upstairs, a howl of impotent fury. I sat down at my desk and opened the next video file. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. One pawn down, the king was exposed, and checkmate was getting closer every day. The silence that settled over the basement after the doctor fled was heavier than the concrete floor beneath my feet. Upstairs, I could hear the faint, rhythmic pacing of Brent walking back and forth in the living room like a caged tiger. He was wounded and dangerous, but I was not thinking about him. I was thinking about the look on Jasmine's face when I destroyed the doctor. She had looked terrified, but not for me. She was terrified of what would happen to her if Brent fell. I sat down at my makeshift desk on the washing machine. The air was freezing, but I was sweating. My finger hovered over the enter key. The next file in the queue was Video 15. The thumbnail showed Lucinda, but she was not sitting at the desk in the command center. She was lying in bed. Her skin was gray. She was hooked up to an oxygen monitor. This was recorded near the end. I pressed play. Lucinda looked into the camera. Her eyes were wet. She took a ragged breath that rattled in her chest. Vic, she whispered. This is the hardest video I have to make. If you are watching this, it means you have already engaged Brent. It means you are winning. But before you go any further, you need to know the whole truth. You are fighting to save our daughter. You think she is a victim. You think she is a hostage to Brent's manipulation. She paused and closed her eyes as if the words physically hurt her. I thought so too, Vic. I wanted to believe that my little girl was just weak. I wanted to believe she was just blind. But 3 days ago, I found this. On the screen, Lucinda held up her iPad. She pressed play on an audio file. The sound was clear. It was a recording from the baby monitor system we had installed for the grandchildren that never came. The camera was in the kitchen. I heard Brent's voice. You have to increase the dose, Jasmine. She is taking too long to die. The investors are getting impatient. I need that trust fund unlocked by the end of the month. My heart stopped beating. I leaned closer to the laptop screen, desperate to hear a refusal, desperate to hear my daughter scream or call the police or hit him. Instead, I heard Jasmine's voice. It was low and shaking, but it was clear. I can't give her the double dose, Brent. She will notice the taste. She complained about the bitterness in the soup yesterday. Then put it in her tea, Brent snapped. Just do it. Do you want me to default on the loan? Do you want to lose this house? Do you want to go back to being a nobody? There was a pause. A long, terrible silence. Fine, Jasmine said. I will put it in her tea. But you promised me the penthouse, Brent. You promised me we would go to Paris after the funeral. I promise, baby, Brent said. Just get it done. The recording ended. Lucinda lowered the iPad. Tears were streaming down her face. She knew Vic. Lucinda sobbed. Our daughter knew he was poisoning me. She didn't just stand by. She helped him. She traded my life for a penthouse and a trip to Paris. She traded her mother for money. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there in the dark. I did not move. I did not breathe. It felt as if the ceiling of the basement had collapsed and crushed me. My entire life flashed before my eyes, but not in the way they say it does in movies. I didn't see the happy moments. I didn't see Jasmine blowing out candles on her 5th birthday. I didn't see her riding on my shoulders at the zoo. I saw the lies. I saw every time she smiled at me while knowing her husband was killing her mother. I saw the way she poured the tea for Lucinda with steady hands. I saw the way she stood at the funeral pretending to cry while wearing the pearls she had stripped from her mother's cold neck. A sound escaped my throat that I did not recognize. It was a low, guttural moan like a wounded animal dying in the snow. I slid off the rusty chair and fell onto the cold concrete floor. I curled into a ball. For the first time since the funeral, I cried. I wept not for Lucinda because she was at peace. I wept for the little girl I thought I had raised. That girl was dead. She had died a long time ago, and a monster had taken her place. A monster who could look her dying mother in the eye and administer poison because she was afraid of being poor. I lay there on the freezing floor for what felt like hours. The cold seeped into my marrow. I shivered violently, but it wasn't from the temperature. It was the shock of a heart breaking into dust. I had come into this house to be a savior. I thought I was a knight charging in to rescue the princess from the dragon, but the princess was the dragon. Why, God? I whispered into the darkness. Why did you let me live to see this? I wanted to give up. I wanted to close the laptop and walk out the door. I wanted to walk into the snow and keep walking until I froze to death so I could be with Lucinda. What was the point of fighting? What was the point of winning if the prize was a daughter who wanted me dead? But then I heard it. The sound of laughter upstairs. It was muffled, but I heard it. Brent and Jasmine. They were laughing. Maybe they were watching a movie. Maybe they were drinking wine to celebrate surviving the doctor. They were living their lives on the ashes of mine. The sound of their joy was the spark that reignited the engine. I stopped crying. I pushed myself up from the floor. My joints popped, my body ached, but I stood up. I walked over to the laundry sink in the corner of the basement. The faucet was rusted and leaked a steady drip. I turned the handle. The water came out brown at first, then ran clear and icy cold. I cupped my hands and splashed the freezing water onto my face. The shock was electric. It washed away the tears. It washed away the snot. It washed away the father. I grabbed a rough rag and scrubbed my face until the skin was raw and red. I looked into the cracked mirror above the sink. The eyes staring back at me were no longer the eyes of a parent. They were the eyes of a judge, an executioner. I walked back to the laptop. I opened the file labeled Mission Objectives. There was a list of names under the heading Targets. Brent Sterling. Destroy Tiffany Miller. Neutralize Dr. Ellis. Expose Jasmine Sterling. Protect. I stared at the last line. Protect. I had written that code. I had programmed my entire strategy around shielding her from the fallout. I had held back my punches to make sure she didn't get hit by the shrapnel. I highlighted the word protect. I hit the backspace key, one keystroke. Then I typed in caps lock, Jasmine Sterling, destroy. I saved the file. The hesitation was gone. The mercy was gone. If she wanted to be a partner in crime, she would share the punishment of the criminal. She wanted a penthouse. She wanted Paris. She wanted money more than blood. Fine. I would show her what happens when the money runs out. I opened the next video file. It was titled, The IPO Launch. I cracked my knuckles. I am not your father anymore, Jasmine, I said to the ceiling. I am just the man who is going to burn your world to the ground. I began to type. The night before the end of the world was quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens before a dam bursts. I sat in my basement bunker listening to the footsteps upstairs. Brent was pacing again, but this time the rhythm was different. It was not the frantic pacing of a man who was afraid. It was the swaggering strut of a man who thought he had already won. Tomorrow was the day, the initial public offering of Sterling Capital. For months, Brent had been talking about this day like it was the second coming of Christ. He was going to take his company public. He was going to sell shares to thousands of unsuspecting investors. He was going to turn his debt-ridden house of cards into a fortune of $20 million. I adjusted the antenna on my wireless receiver and tapped into the audio feed from the living room. Brent was on the phone. His voice was loud, booming with the false confidence of a salesman who has started to believe his own lies. "Yes, I want the 60-foot model," he was shouting into the phone. "And I want the interior done in teak, not oak. Oak is for peasants. Make sure it is ready for delivery by June. I will pay cash." He was buying a yacht. He was spending money he did not have yet based on a stock price that existed only in his imagination. I heard the clink of glass against glass. He was celebrating. He was drinking the Macallan 25 that I had been saving for my 50th wedding anniversary, the anniversary I would never have. I listened as he called his travel agent. He booked a first-class suite to the Maldives. He booked a private jet. He was planning his escape. He was going to take the money and run, leaving Jasmine behind to deal with the wreckage of his fake empire. I looked at the time on my laptop screen. It was 11 p.m. Lucinda appeared on the screen in video 16. She looked professional in this one, wearing her reading glasses and a blazer. This was not the grieving wife. This was the accountant. This was the woman who had balanced the books for Sterling Capital for 5 years before she got sick. She was the one who had hidden the bodies. And now she was going to hand me the shovel to dig them up. "Vic," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Brent thinks he is a financial genius. He is not. He is a fraud. The numbers he submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission are fiction. He has hidden $3 million of bad debt in shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He thinks no one can find them because he encrypted the ledger." She leaned closer to the camera. "But I wrote the encryption key, Vic. I built the back door. And tonight you are going to walk right through it." I waited until 2 a.m. The house was silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the wind howling outside. I knew Brent was asleep. The amount of scotch he had consumed would keep him under until dawn. I crept up the basement stairs. The steps were wooden, but I knew exactly where to place my feet to avoid the creaks. I was a shadow moving through the house I had paid for. I entered the master bedroom. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol and expensive cologne. Brent was sprawled across the bed, snoring with his mouth open. Jasmine was sleeping on the far edge of the mattress, her back turned to him. Even in sleep, she looked unhappy. But I felt no pity. Not tonight. Brent's laptop was sitting on the mahogany desk in the corner. The little green light on the side was pulsing. It was in sleep mode. I sat down in the leather chair. I did not turn on the lamp. The moonlight reflecting off the snow outside provided enough illumination. I opened the laptop lid. The screen flared to life, demanding a password. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. Lucinda had left it in the red shoe along with the key card. I inserted it into the side of the laptop. I did not need to guess his password. The drive contained a brute force bypass program that Lucinda had written herself. A small terminal window opened on the screen. Lines of code scrolled past faster than the eye could follow. Green text on a black background. Access granted. I was in. I navigated to the folder labeled IPO Final Submission. This was the document that was scheduled to be automatically uploaded to the exchange servers at 6 a.m. It was the prospectus that investors would read before buying the stock. It contained the profit projections, the asset listings, and the liability reports. I opened the spreadsheet. It was a masterpiece of creative accounting. Brent had moved the debt into a hidden tab labeled Do Not Print. He had inflated the revenue by 40%. It was a lie worth $20 million. I opened the file Lucinda had given me. It was a script, a simple macro command that would reverse every change Brent had made. I hesitated for a second. My finger hovered over the execute key. I looked at Brent sleeping in the bed. He looked like a child. He had no idea that the man he called a senile fool was sitting 5 feet away holding a digital knife to his throat. If I did this, there was no going back. He would be ruined. He would go to prison. I thought about the poison in Lucinda's tea. I thought about the cold basement. I thought about the arrogance in his voice when he ordered the yacht. I pressed the key. The screen flashed once. The macro ran. The hidden tabs were unhidden. The debt was moved back to the main balance sheet. The inflated revenue was corrected to show the actual losses. The shell companies in the Cayman Islands were listed as high-risk, unsecured liabilities. I saved the document. I closed the laptop. I pulled out the USB drive. I stood up and looked at Brent one last time. Sleep well, son. Because when you wake up, you are going to be the poorest man in Chicago. I slipped back down into the darkness of the basement. I did not sleep. I sat in my chair and watched the clock count down. 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. At 6 a.m., I saw the upload notification on my own laptop, which was mirroring his network traffic. The file was sent. The truth was out. The sun came up at 7 a.m. It was a bright, cold morning. I heard the alarm go off upstairs. I heard Brent singing in the shower. He was singing Sinatra. The best is yet to come. He came downstairs at 8 a.m. wearing his best suit. He looked like $1 million. He poured himself a coffee and turned on the big television in the living room. He tuned it to the financial news channel. I watched the feed on my laptop. The market opened at 9:30 a.m. The bell rang. The ticker at the bottom of the screen started to scroll. Sterling Capital STC opening delayed. Brent frowned. He picked up his phone. He called his broker. "Why is it delayed?" he asked. "Is demand too high? Are we oversubscribed?" I could not hear the broker's answer, but I saw the blood drain from Brent's face. "What do you mean investigation?" he shouted. "What do you mean accounting irregularities?" On the television screen, the news anchor broke into the broadcast. Breaking news from Wall Street. The highly anticipated IPO of Sterling Capital has been halted before trading could begin. The Securities and Exchange Commission has flagged the company's filing for gross discrepancies. Sources say the submitted prospectus reveals massive undisclosed debt and potential fraud. Brent dropped his phone. It hit the floor with a crack. "No," he whispered. "That is a mistake. That is the wrong file." He ran to his laptop. He opened it with shaking hands. He pulled up the document he had sent. He scrolled through the pages. I saw him freeze. He was staring at the liabilities column. The numbers were red, deep red. They showed the truth. He started to scream. It was a high-pitched sound of pure panic. "Who did this?" he shrieked. He looked around the room wildly. He looked at Jasmine, who had just walked in. "Did you touch my computer?" he yelled at her. Jasmine shook her head, terrified. "No, Brent, I don't even know your password." The phone started ringing. Then his other phone. Then the landline. It was a symphony of disaster. I watched the television. The reporter continued, "Analysts are calling this one of the most brazen attempts at fraud in recent history. If these numbers are accurate, Sterling Capital is not worth $20 million. It is effectively bankrupt." Brent sank to his knees. He grabbed his hair and pulled. "My yacht," he whimpered. "My money." He had lost $20 million in less than an hour. But he had lost more than that. He had lost his freedom. The SEC does not take kindly to people who try to lie to the market. I sat in my basement and took a sip of cold water. The foundation had crumbled. The roof had caved in. And the engineer was just watching the dust settle. I opened the next video file. Lucinda was smiling. "Now that he is broke, Vic," she said, "let us see how tough he really is." I closed the laptop. The show was just beginning. The crash of the front door against the wall shook the entire house. It was not the entrance of a man returning to his castle, but the invasion of a wounded animal seeking a dark corner to lick its wounds. I sat in my chair in the basement listening to the heavy dragging footsteps on the floorboards above. It was 7 in the evening. The sun had set on the worst day of Brent Sterling's life. He had left the house at dawn with dreams of a $20 million fortune and a private jet. He had returned with a worthless company, a frozen bank account, and the looming threat of federal prison. I heard the distinct sound of glass shattering. Another bottle of my scotch had just met its end. For the last 2 hours, he had been drinking with a ferocity that was terrifying to witness. I watched him on the monitor. He was no longer the slick financial genius in the Italian suit. His tie was gone. His shirt was unbuttoned, revealing a chest slick with sweat. He was stumbling around the living room, kicking at the furniture, muttering to himself. He looked like a man possessed. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. Jasmine was nowhere to be seen. I checked the other camera feeds. She was locked in the guest bedroom. She had barricaded the door with a dresser. She was smart enough to know that a man like Brent does not handle failure with grace. He looks for someone to blame. He looks for a punching bag. and tonight the only punching bag available was the old man in the basement. I watched as Brent stopped in the middle of the living room. He swayed on his feet. He looked up at the ceiling. He looked directly at the smoke detector where the hidden camera was housing. It was as if a sudden bolt of lightning had struck his alcohol-soaked brain. He connected the dots. The bank freeze, the party disaster, the doctor running away, the IPO collapse. It was too much bad luck for 1 week. It was not luck. It was sabotage. He let out a roar that vibrated through the floorboards. Victor. He screamed my name with enough hate to melt steel. I saw him turn toward the hallway closet. He pulled out an aluminum baseball bat. It was a souvenir from a charity game he had played once to look like a philanthropist. He gripped the handle until his knuckles turned white. I did not run. I did not hide. I sat calmly at my desk and opened the final program Lucinda had prepared for this phase. It was a simple interface connected to the neighborhood watch alert system and the community Facebook group. I hovered my finger over the button labeled Broadcast. I heard his footsteps thundering toward the basement door. He kicked it open. The wood splintered. "I am coming for you, old man," he screamed. "You did this. I know you did this." He began to descend the stairs. The bat scraped against the wall, making a sound like a knife on bone. I waited. I needed him to be fully committed. I needed him to cross the line from angry relative to violent criminal. I needed the world to see the monster without his mask. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He stood in the doorway of my concrete cell, breathing heavy. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He looked at me sitting on my rusty cot. He looked at the laptop humming on the washing machine. "You ruined me," he hissed. "You hacked my files. You destroyed my deal." I looked him in the eye. I did not deny it. "I just balanced the books, Brent," I said calmly. He raised the bat. I pressed the enter key. Instantly, the floodlights I had rigged in the basement corners flared to life, blinding him for a second. At the same time, a high-pitched siren began to wail from the external speakers on the front porch. But the most important weapon was silent. The webcam on my laptop and the security camera in the corner began to stream live. The notification went out to 4,000 people in the Lincoln Park community group. Alert: violent break-in in progress. 42 Oak Street. Brent blinked in the harsh light. He did not know he was live. He did not know that his investors, his neighbors, and his victims were watching him on their phones. "Die!" he screamed. He swung the bat. I could have dodged. I still had the reflexes of a man who had worked on construction sites, but I knew that a near miss was not enough. To put him away for good, to ensure he never hurt Jasmine again. I needed scars. I needed blood. I raised my left arm to protect my head. I braced myself. The aluminum bat connected with my forearm. The sound was a sickening crunch. The pain was immediate and blinding. It felt like a bolt of white-hot electricity shot up my shoulder and exploded in my brain. My bones snapped. I fell off the chair and hit the concrete floor hard. Brent stood over me, panting. He raised the bat again for a killing blow, but then he heard it. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard it too, the wail of sirens. Not the alarm I had set, but real police sirens getting closer. The neighbors had called 911 the second the notification popped up. Brent froze. He looked at the bat in his hand. He looked at me lying on the floor, clutching my broken arm. He looked at the red recording light on the laptop camera. His face went pale. The rage evaporated, leaving only the terror of a child who realizes he has broken something he cannot fix. "What is that light?" he whispered, pointing at the computer. "That is the world watching you, Brent." I gritted out through the pain. "Say hello to your audience." I could hear tires screeching on the pavement outside, car doors slamming, voices shouting. "Police, open up." Brent dropped the bat. It clanged on the concrete floor. He backed away, shaking his head. No, he muttered. "I didn't mean to." He fell. He attacked me. He turned and ran up the stairs. I lay on the floor, breathing through the pain. My arm was bent at an unnatural angle, but I felt a strange sense of peace. The trap had snapped shut. The evidence was irrefutable. I heard the front door being kicked in. I heard the shouting of officers clearing the rooms. "Police, show me your hands. Get on the ground." I heard the struggle. Brent was screaming that he was the victim. He was screaming that I was crazy. But it is hard to argue when 4,000 people just watched you beat an unarmed pensioner with a baseball bat. Moments later, 2 officers came down the basement stairs, guns drawn. They saw me. They saw the bat. They called for paramedics immediately. One officer knelt beside me. "Sir, Can you hear me? Who did this to you?" I pointed to the laptop screen where the live stream was still running, showing the replay of the attack. "He did," I whispered. "My son-in-law." They brought Brent out in handcuffs 5 minutes later. I was being wheeled out on a stretcher, my arms splinted and wrapped. The entire neighborhood was on the street. People were filming with their phones. The same people Brent had tried to impress with his parties and his lies were now witnessing his total humiliation. I saw Jasmine standing by the ambulance. She was wrapped in a blanket, shivering. She looked at Brent as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. He was crying, begging her to call his lawyer. She didn't move. She looked at me. She saw the bruises. She saw the broken arm. And for the first time in years, I saw the fog lift from her eyes. She wasn't looking at her husband, the financial genius. She was looking at a wife-beater. I locked eyes with Brent through the window of the police car as the strobe lights painted his face in red and blue. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. The game was over. The king had fallen. And the old engineer, despite his broken wing, was the last man standing on the board. The paramedic leaned over me. "Sir, we are going to give you something for the pain." I shook my head. "No," I said, looking at the stars above the Chicago skyline. "I want to feel this. It feels like justice." The police lights had faded from the basement window, leaving me in the gray gloom of my concrete bunker. My arm throbbed with a dull, heavy ache under the splint the paramedics had applied, but the pain was distant. It belonged to a body that I was merely inhabiting while my mind worked on a different plane. I sat on the edge of my cot listening to the silence of the empty house. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that fills a space where a family used to be. I knew she would come. I had calculated the probability. Jasmine was a creature of dependency. She had moved from my protection to Brent's protection without ever learning to stand on her own 2 feet. Now that Brent was in a holding cell, she would instinctively look for the next available host. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A beam of yellow hallway light cut through the darkness. I heard the soft shuffle of slippers on wood. "Daddy." The word hung in the air, weak and trembling. It was the voice of a little girl who had scraped her knee. But the woman descending the stairs was 32 years old. Her mascara was smeared across her cheeks like war paint that had run in the rain. Her expensive cocktail dress was rumpled, and she was hugging herself as if she were freezing. She reached the bottom of the stairs and stood there looking at me. She looked at my bandaged arm. She looked at the laptop that had broadcast her husband's violence to the world. Then she collapsed. It wasn't a faint. It was a performance. She dropped to her knees on the cold concrete floor and crawled toward me. She grabbed my good hand and pressed it against her wet cheek. "Please, Daddy," she sobbed. "You have to stop this. You have to fix it." I looked down at her. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a cold, clinical detachment. I was looking at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Fix what, Jasmine?" I asked, my voice flat. "Fix Brent," she cried. "Call the police. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you provoked him. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. If you drop the charges, they will let him go. We can hire the best lawyers. We can spin this." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "He is family, Daddy. You always said family protects each other. He made a mistake. He was stressed. He didn't mean to hurt you. He loves us." I pulled my hand away from her grip. It felt slimy. "He broke my arm with a baseball bat, Jasmine," I said. "That is not love. That is attempted murder." "He was drunk," she pleaded. "He lost everything today. The IPO failed. The bank accounts are frozen. He was out of his mind with grief. You have to understand. We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything." She grabbed my leg, shaking me. "Think about me, Daddy. If he goes to prison, I will be destitute. I will be the wife of a convict. My reputation will be ruined. Do you want that for your little girl? Do you want me to suffer because of your pride?" I watched her beg. She wasn't crying for me. She wasn't crying for her dead mother. She was crying for her reputation. She was crying for the money. She was using the word family as a weapon to bludgeon me into submission. It was the same weapon she had used for years, the same weapon that had kept me silent while they stripped me of my dignity. But the weapon was out of ammunition. "Stand up, Jasmine," I said. She didn't move. She kept weeping loudly, hoping the volume of her grief would drown out the facts. I said, "Stand up." My voice cracked like a whip in the small room. She flinched and scrambled to her feet, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. You want to talk about family, I said, standing up and facing her. You want to talk about protection. Let me show you what your husband does to the people he is supposed to protect. I turned to the laptop on the washing machine. I opened the file I had been saving for this exact moment. It was not the video of the beating. It was video 1, the confession. Watch, I ordered, pointing at the screen. Jasmine looked at the screen reluctantly. When she saw her mother's face appear, she gasped. "Mom," she whispered. I pressed play. I watched Jasmine's face as Lucinda began to speak. I watched as my wife explained in calm, terrifying detail how Brent had been switching her heart medication. I watched as Lucinda held up the toxicology report she had run on herself. "He is poisoning me, Vic," Lucinda said on the screen. "He is killing me to get the trust fund early." Jasmine stared at the video. Her face went pale. Her breathing became shallow. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that is not true." And Jasmine knows, Lucinda's voice continued. She knows because she is the one who picks up the prescription. She knows because she sees him crush the pills. Jasmine stumbled back as if she had been physically struck. She backed into the wall, shaking her head violently. "Stop it," she screamed, covering her ears. "Turn it off." "I didn't turn it off." I let her mother's voice fill the room. "It is a lie," Jasmine shouted, closing her eyes. "You made this up. You used deepfake technology. You hated him from the beginning. You were always jealous of him because he was successful, and you were just a boring engineer." She opened her eyes and glared at me with pure venom. "You rigged this. You forced Mom to say those things. She was sick. She was confused. You manipulated her. Brent would never hurt her. He loved her. He took care of her. She was rewriting history in real time. She was building a fortress of denial to protect her own conscience. If she admitted that Brent was a murderer, she would have to admit that she was an accomplice, and her fragile ego could not survive that weight. "He killed her, Jasmine," I said, stepping closer to her. "He murdered your mother for money, and you let him." "Liar," she shrieked. "You are the monster. You are the one destroying this family. You are just a bitter old man who can't stand to see us happy." She lunged at the laptop, trying to knock it off the washer, trying to kill the truth. I caught her wrist with my good hand. My grip was iron. I wasn't the weak old man she thought I was. I was a man who had swung sledgehammers for a living. "Let go of me," she screamed, clawing at my hand with her manicured nails. I looked into her eyes. They were wild and empty. There was no soul there, just greed and fear. I pulled her close. "Jasmine," I said softly. She looked at me, panting, expecting me to comfort her. Then I slapped her. It wasn't a violent backhand. It was a sharp, open palm slap across her cheek. The sound was loud in the small room. It was the kind of slap you give to someone who is hysterical. A slap to reset the system. She froze. Her hand went to her cheek. She stared at me in total shock. I had never laid a hand on her in her entire life. "Get out," I said. She blinked, tears spilling over again. "Daddy," she whimpered. "Don't call me that," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the Chicago wind. "My daughter died 3 days ago. She died when she chose a murderer over her mother." I pointed to the stairs. "Get out of my basement. Get out of my sight. And pray that the police don't find the recordings I have of you." She stood there for a moment, trembling. She realized then that the bank was closed. The emotional credit line she had been drawing on for 30 years had finally run dry. She turned and ran up the stairs, sobbing not for her mother but for herself. I listened to her footsteps fade away. I turned back to the laptop and closed the video of my wife. My hand was stinging from the slap, but the pain in my chest was gone. The surgery was complete. I had cut out the rot. I was alone in the dark, but for the first time in a long time, the air tasted clean. The silence in the basement was absolute after Jasmine fled up the stairs. It was the silence of a battlefield after the shooting stops. I sat in my rusty chair and listened to the hum of the washing machine beneath my laptop. I was alone, but I was not finished. I had broken the queen, but the king was still on the board. Brent Sterling was wounded and humiliated, but a man like that does not stop until he is dead or behind bars forever. I turned back to the screen. The file queue showed only a few videos left. I clicked on video 30. Lucinda appeared. She was wearing a silk scarf around her head, covering the hair loss from the chemotherapy. She looked frail, but her eyes were burning with a fierce intelligence. She held up a small black object. It looked like a USB drive, but I recognized it immediately. It was a Titan Ledger, a cold storage hardware wallet used for cryptocurrency. "Vic," she said, holding the device closer to the camera. "Brent thinks he is smarter than everyone. He thinks the banks are for losers. For the last 2 years, he has been siphoning money from his investors not just into shell companies, but into Bitcoin and Ethereum. He calls it his doomsday fund. He thinks it is untraceable. He thinks that if everything crashes, he can just grab this drive and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty. She paused, and a small triumphant smile touched her lips. He keeps this drive in a safe behind the painting in his office. He thinks the code is uncrackable. But he made a mistake, Vic. He wrote the recovery seed phrase, the 12 words that unlock the fortune, on the back of a business card. He hid that card inside the frame of our wedding photo, the one that hangs in the hallway. I reached into my pocket. I had taken that photo frame down days ago when I was sabotaging the house. I had found the card. I pulled it out now. 12 words written in Brent's jagged handwriting. 12 words that were worth $50 million. Lucinda continued on the screen. He thinks he lost the key, Vic. I swapped the card for a blank one 3 weeks ago. He has been tearing his office apart looking for it. He thinks he misplaced it. He doesn't know that I have it. And now you have it. She leaned into the lens. This is $50 million, Vic. It is enough to buy a new life. It is enough to disappear. But we are not going to spend it. We are going to use it as bait. Brent is going to be desperate. The SEC has frozen his bank accounts. He has no cash. He has no credit. This drive is his only way out. He will come for it. And when he does, we will be waiting. The video ended. I held the card in my hand. $50 million. It was just a piece of cardboard with words on it. Blue, harvest, signal, tower. Random words that represented the stolen dreams of hundreds of people. To Brent, this was freedom. To me, it was just a rope to hang him with. I heard the heavy chime of the front doorbell. It was not the frantic ringing of a family member. It was the solid, authoritative press of a professional. I went upstairs. My arm was throbbing in the sling, but I ignored it. I opened the door. Standing on the porch was a tall man in a charcoal suit. He had silver hair and carried a briefcase that looked like it cost more than my car. It was Elias Harper. He was the only lawyer Lucinda had trusted. He was the one who had helped her set up the secret trust and the one who had been waiting for my call. "Mr. King," he said, nodding at my broken arm, "I see things have escalated." "Come in, Elias," I said, stepping aside. We went into the kitchen. The debris from Brent's tantrum was still scattered on the floor, but we ignored it. Harper placed his briefcase on the island and opened it. He pulled out a file. "He made bail," Harper said without preamble. His lawyers argued that he has no prior convictions and that the assault was a family dispute. He posted the bond 20 minutes ago. He's walking out of the county jail as we speak. I nodded. I expected that. A man like Brent always has one last favor to call in. He is desperate, Harper continued. The federal freeze on his assets is total. He cannot buy a plane ticket. He cannot rent a car. He cannot even buy a sandwich. He is a fugitive in a suit. I placed the small card with the seed phrase on the counter between us. He needs this, I said. Harper looked at the card. The ghost wallet. Lucinda told me about this. This is the only leverage he has left. If he gets these codes, he can access $50 million from anywhere in the world. He will try to leave the country tonight. That is the plan, I said. We need to catch him not just for assault, but for the money laundering. We need to catch him accessing these funds. Harper nodded slowly. He pulled a small recording device from his bag. This is a wire, Harper said. It is omnidirectional. If you can get him to admit that this money is stolen, and if you can get him to try to take it, we have him on federal wire fraud and grand larceny. The FBI is already monitoring his location, but they need a smoking gun. I picked up the device and slipped it into my pocket. I will get him to talk, I said. He loves the sound of his own voice almost as much as he loves money. Harper looked at me with concern. Victor, he is dangerous. He already broke your arm. If he realizes it is a trap, he might try to finish the job. Let him try, I said, touching the bandage on my arm. I have nothing left to break. Harper closed his briefcase. Set the meeting. Make it somewhere private, somewhere he feels safe. I knew exactly where to go. I waited until Harper left. I sat in the dark kitchen, illuminated only by the streetlights outside. My phone vibrated on the table. It was a news alert. Disgraced CEO Brent Sterling released on bail. I picked up the phone. I opened the messaging app. I typed in Brent's number. I did not type a greeting. I did not ask how he was. I took a picture of the card, just the first 3 words. Blue. Harvest. Signal. I sent the photo. Then I typed a single line of text. I found what you were looking for. The response came in less than 10 seconds. 3 dots dancing on the screen showing he was typing frantically. Where are you? I typed back slowly, savoring every letter. I am where you buried your conscience. Lucinda's grave. 1 hour. Bring the keys to the house. If you want the codes, you have to give me back my home. The reply was instant. I am coming. If you talk to the cops, I will kill you. I put the phone down. I looked at the kitchen one last time. This was the house where I had raised my daughter. This was the house where I had grown old with my wife. Brent had turned it into a prison. Tonight, I would turn it back into a home. I put on my coat. I checked the recorder in my pocket. I checked the empty gun I had taken from Brent's safe earlier that day. I didn't need bullets. I just needed him to believe I was afraid. I walked out into the snow. The final act was about to begin. The wind in Chicago does not simply blow at cuts. It slices through layers of wool and skin, seeking the warmth of the bone marrow. I stood in the center of the Graceland Cemetery, surrounded by the silent congregation of the dead. It was midnight. The snow had started falling again, thick, heavy flakes that spiraled down from a charcoal sky covering the footprints of the mourners who had visited earlier that day. The only light came from the distant orange glow of the street lamps on Clark Street and the small battery-powered projector I had set up on a tripod facing my wife's grave. I brushed a layer of snow off the granite headstone. Lucinda King, beloved wife, mother. The stone was cold against my palm. I traced the letters of her name. I was not afraid of the ghosts in this place. The dead do not hurt you. It is the living you have to watch out for. I checked the recorder in my pocket one last time. It was running. I checked the projector. It was in standby mode, connected to my phone via Bluetooth. I stood like a statue in the shadow of a large oak tree, waiting for the monsters to arrive. The silence of the graveyard was heavy, broken only by the groan of tree branches bending under the weight of the ice. It was a fitting stage for the final act. This was where my life had effectively ended 3 days ago, and this was where Brent's life was going to end tonight. Not by violence, but by the truth. I was an engineer, and I had built a machine of justice. Tonight I would flip the switch. Twin beams of halogen light cut through the darkness, slicing across the rows of tombstones. A black SUV rolled slowly down the narrow cemetery path, its tires crunching on the frozen gravel. The engine growled low and menacing. The car stopped 20 yards away. The headlights remained on, blinding me, casting long, distorted shadows against the snow. The driver door opened. Brent stepped out. He was not wearing a coat. He was wearing the same suit he had been arrested in, rumpled and stained. His tie was loose, hanging around his neck like a noose. Even from this distance, I could see the mania in his movements. He didn't walk. He stalked. His head snapped back and forth, scanning the darkness, looking for a trap, looking for the police, looking for his $50 million. Jasmine stepped out of the passenger side. She was wrapped in a fur coat, shivering violently. She looked small, defeated, but she was standing next to him. She had made her choice. Even after the slap, even after the truth, she was still betting on the horse she thought would win. I stepped out from behind the oak tree into the beam of the headlights. "I am here, Brent," I said. My voice did not tremble. Brent whipped around. His eyes were wide and rimmed with red. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week, a man fueled by caffeine and desperation. "Give it to me!" he shouted. He did not say hello. He did not apologize. He just held out a shaking hand. "Give me the codes, Victor. I know you have them." He marched toward me, kicking snow onto the graves of strangers. Jasmine followed him a few steps behind, keeping her head down. "You broke my arm, Brent," I said, pointing to the sling. "You beat me with a bat. And now you want me to give you a fortune. I want what is mine," he screamed. "That money belongs to me. I earned it. I was smart enough to hide it. You are just a thief, a senile old thief who stole my property." He stopped 5 feet away from me. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. I could see the sweat freezing on his forehead. "You are not going to use that money to rebuild the company, are you?" I asked loudly, making sure the recorder caught every word. You are going to run. You are going to leave Jasmine behind to face the FBI. Brent laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. Of course I'm going to run, you idiot. The feds have frozen everything. This country is finished for me. But with 50 million in crypto, I can live like a king in Brazil. I can start over. He turned to Jasmine, who was standing by a marble angel crying silently. And she knows it, don't you, baby? She knows I have to go first. I will send for her later, once I am set up. She understands sacrifice. Jasmine looked up. Her eyes were hollow. Just give him the card, Daddy, she whispered. Please, let him go. If he leaves, maybe the police will stop coming to the house. Maybe we can have some peace. I looked at my daughter. She was willing to let a criminal escape just to buy a moment of silence. She was willing to let her mother's murderer vanish into a tropical paradise just so she wouldn't have to face the shame of a trial. He killed your mother, Jasmine, I said, my voice hard. He didn't just steal money. He stopped her heart. Liar, Brent roared. He lunged forward, grabbing the lapels of my coat with his freezing hands. Prove it. You have nothing. Just the rantings of a dying woman. No court will believe those videos. She was on heavy medication. She was hallucinating. I will tell the judge you manipulated her. I will tell them you are the crazy one. He shook me, ignoring my broken arm. Give me the card, Victor, or I swear to God I will finish what I started in the basement. No one is watching now. No live stream. Just you and me and the dead. I looked into his eyes. I saw the abyss there. I saw a man who had no bottom to his soul. You want proof, Brent? I asked quietly. Yes, he hissed. I reached into my pocket. He thought I was reaching for the card. His eyes lit up with greed, but I didn't pull out the card. I pulled out my phone. I tapped a single button. Behind me, the projector whirred to life. A beam of bright white light cut through the snow and hit the large gray granite surface of Lucinda's tombstone. The image was crisp and clear in the night air. It was video 36. Brent froze. He looked at the grave. He saw himself. It was a video taken 6 months ago. The timestamp was in the corner. Brent was sitting in his office holding a glass of whiskey. He was laughing. He was talking to the camera on his own phone, recording a video diary he thought no one would ever see. I did it, the Brent on the tombstone said. His voice echoed through the cemetery, amplified by the Bluetooth speaker I had hidden in the flower vase. The bitch finally kicked the bucket. It took longer than I thought. Those heart pills are stronger than they look. I had to crush 3 times the dose into her tea this morning. In the video, Brent took a sip of whiskey and smiled a smile of pure evil. But it is done. The trust fund unlocks tomorrow. $20 million. And Jasmine didn't even flinch. She handed her the cup like a good little soldier. I own this family. I own this money. I am a genius. The video looped. I had to crush 3 times the dose. Brent stared at the tombstone. He stared at his own confession playing on the grave of the woman he murdered. His face went white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jasmine screamed. It was a scream of pure horror. She looked at the video, then she looked at Brent. The denial finally shattered. The lies finally broke. There was no way to spin this. There was no way to misunderstand. You recorded yourself, she screamed. You laughed about it. Brent stumbled back away from the light. No, he whispered. That is fake. That is AI. I stepped forward. Lucinda hacked your cloud backup, Brent, I said. She found your deleted folder. She saw everything. I looked at him with pity. Not for him, but for the human race that had to share the planet with him. You are not a genius, Brent. You are just a man who filmed his own crimes because his ego was too big to keep a secret. Brent looked around wildly. He looked at the darkness surrounding us. He realized he had walked into a trap that had no exit. He reached into his jacket pocket. I knew what was coming. I saw the glint of metal. He pulled out the gun. The barrel of the gun was shaking violently, but at a distance of 5 feet, even a desperate coward does not miss. Brent held the weapon with both hands, aiming directly at the center of my chest. His face was a mask of sweat and snow and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was not looking at his father-in-law anymore. He was looking at the only obstacle standing between him and $50 million. He was looking at the man who had turned his life into a nightmare. Say goodbye, Victor, he hissed through gritted teeth. I did not flinch. I did not close my eyes. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the moment he fully committed to his own destruction. I stood perfectly still, my broken arm throbbing in the sling, my breath clouding in the freezing air. I looked past the gun into his eyes. You are making a mistake, Brent, I said calmly. He laughed. A short, sharp bark of madness. The only mistake I made was not killing you in the basement. His finger tightened on the trigger. I saw the muscles in his forearm flex. I saw the hammer pull back. Time seemed to slow down. The snowflakes hung suspended in the air. The beam of the projector cut through the darkness, illuminating the grave of the woman he had murdered. He squeezed. Click. The sound was dry and hollow. It was the sound of metal striking empty steel. It was the sound of a mechanical failure that was actually a mechanical triumph. Brent frowned. He looked at the gun in his hand with genuine confusion. He pulled the trigger again. Click. He pulled it a third time, screaming in frustration. Click, click, click. He stared at the weapon as if it had betrayed him personally. He ejected the magazine. It fell into the snow. It was empty. He pulled back the slide. The chamber was empty. I watched him unravel. I watched the realization wash over him like a bucket of ice water. "You emptied it," he whispered, looking up at me with horror. I nodded slowly. "I checked your safe this morning, Brent, while you were busy destroying the kitchen. I took the bullets. I am an engineer, remember? We always check for safety hazards." Brent let out a roar of primal rage. He threw the useless gun at my head. I ducked and it landed with a thud in the snow beside Lucinda's headstone. "I will kill you with my bare hands," he screamed. He lunged toward me. He reached for the projector, intending to smash the machine that was broadcasting his confession. He wanted to silence the truth. He wanted to tear me apart, but he never reached me. The darkness of the cemetery suddenly exploded into blinding white light. It was not lightning. It was 4 high-intensity tactical floodlights that had been positioned behind the surrounding mausoleums. They flared to life simultaneously, turning the night into day. The sudden brightness was physical. It slammed into us, erasing the shadows, exposing every inch of the graveyard. Brent threw his hands up to shield his eyes, stumbling back. Jasmine shrieked and fell to her knees, covering her head. A voice boomed out of the light, amplified by a megaphone. It was a voice of absolute authority. "Federal agents, drop to your knees. Put your hands on your head. Now!" The sound of footsteps rushing from all sides filled the air. Heavy boots crunching on the frozen gravel. The rustle of tactical gear. The distinct metallic sound of rifles being raised. I stood still, squinting against the glare. I saw silhouettes moving through the snow. Dozens of them. They wore jackets with bold yellow letters on the back. FBI. Brent was spinning in circles, looking for an escape route that did not exist. He looked like a rat trapped in a bucket of light. "No," he screamed. "No, this is a trap. You can't do this. I want my lawyer." "Get on the ground," the voice commanded again, closer this time. 2 agents materialized out of the glare. They were moving fast, low to the ground. They didn't hesitate. One of them tackled Brent mid-scream. They hit the snow with a heavy thud. Brent fought. He kicked and clawed, screaming obscenities, screaming that he was innocent, screaming that I had set him up. He fought like a wild animal, cornered and terrified. "Get off me!" he howled. "Do you know who I am? I am Brent Sterling. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent." The agent grunted, twisting Brent's arm behind his back. I watched as they pressed his face into the frozen earth. The same earth he had disrespected. The same earth where he had buried my wife. The snow turned to mud under the struggle. They cuffed him. The click of the steel ratchets was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. They hauled him to his feet. His expensive suit was covered in mud. His face was scraped and bleeding. He looked at me wild-eyed and desperate. "Victor, tell them," he begged, his voice cracking. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we were just talking. I am family, Victor." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had poisoned my wife and beaten me with a bat. "I have no family named Sterling," I said. The agents dragged him away toward the line of black SUVs waiting at the cemetery gates. He continued to scream until they shoved him into the back seat and slammed the door. Then the cemetery went quiet again. The floodlights remained on, but the violence was over. Or so I thought. I turned to look at Jasmine. She was still kneeling in the snow near the projector. She was staring at the spot where Brent had been taken down. She looked shell-shocked. She looked like she was waiting for someone to come and tell her it was all a bad dream and she could go home now. A female agent walked over to her. She held a pair of handcuffs in her belt. Jasmine looked up. She forced a trembling smile. She tried to stand up, smoothing her fur coat. "Thank God you came," she said to the agent, her voice shaking. "He was crazy. My husband. He lost his mind. I tried to stop him. I told him not to come here." The agent did not smile back. She did not offer a hand. "Jasmine Sterling," the agent said. "Yes," Jasmine said, nodding eagerly. "I am the victim here. He kidnapped me. He forced me to come." The agent pulled out the handcuffs. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, and accessory to murder." Jasmine froze. Her smile vanished. She looked at the agent as if she were speaking a foreign language. What she whispered. "No. You don't understand. I didn't do anything. I just signed some papers. Brent told me to sign them. I didn't know. We have your signature on the shell company documents, Mrs. Sterling," the agent said calmly, taking Jasmine's wrist. "And we have the audio recording of you agreeing to administer the poison." The agent spun her around. Jasmine didn't fight like Brent. She went limp. She let out a low keen of despair as the cuffs locked around her wrists. "No," she sobbed. "No, please. I have a life. I have friends. I can't go to jail." The agent began to lead her away. They walked past me. Jasmine stopped. She dug her heels into the snow. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears. They were the eyes of the little girl I used to read bedtime stories to. They were the eyes of the daughter I had carried on my shoulders. "Daddy," she choked out. "Daddy, please. Tell them. Tell them I am a good person. Tell them I didn't mean it." She pulled against the agent's grip, reaching out her cuffed hands toward me. "I am your daughter," she cried. "You promised Mom you would take care of me. You promised." I looked at her. I looked at the fur coat bought with stolen money. I looked at the face that had watched my wife die and done nothing. The pain in my chest was unbearable. It felt like my heart was being ripped out by the roots. But I remembered the video. I remembered the tea. I remembered the betrayal. "I promised to take care of my daughter," I said, my voice breaking. "But you are not her. My daughter died the day she chose money over her mother." Jasmine's face collapsed. The hope died in her eyes, leaving only a vast, empty darkness. She realized finally that there was no safety net. There was no daddy to fix it. "Take her away," I whispered to the agent. I turned my back on her. I faced Lucinda's grave. Behind me, I heard Jasmine sobbing as she was led away to the cars. I heard the door slam. I heard the engine start. I stood alone in the light. The wind howled through the trees. I touched the cold granite of the tombstone. "It is done, Lucinda," I said to the stone. "The wolves are gone." I fell to my knees in the snow, not from pain, but from exhaustion. The war was over. But looking at the empty space where my family used to be, I wondered if anyone had truly won. The trial of Brent and Jasmine Sterling was the fastest judicial proceeding in the history of Cook County Criminal Court. Usually these things drag on for years with motions and appeals and jury selection, but Lucinda had not left any room for interpretation. She had built a cage of evidence so tight that not even the most expensive defense attorney could find a way out. I sat in the back row of the courtroom every day for 3 weeks. I wore my best suit. I kept my face impassive. I watched as the prosecutor played the videos on large, high-definition screens. The jury did not need to hear witnesses. They just needed to see the smile on Brent's face as he boasted about poisoning my wife. They needed to hear the tremble in Jasmine's voice as she agreed to increase the dosage for a trip to Paris. I watched Brent crumble day by day. The arrogance that had defined him melted away, leaving a small, terrified man who wept when the judge read the verdict. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder and grand larceny. Jasmine fared little better. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of coercive control, but the video of her betraying her mother was too damning. She was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. When the bailiff led her away, she looked back at me one last time. She did not ask for help. She did not cry. She just looked at me with the hollow eyes of a stranger who finally realized that actions have consequences that cannot be paid off with a credit card. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply stood up and walked out of the courtroom into the bright spring sunshine. Justice had been served, but it did not bring Lucinda back. It just cleared the air so I could finally breathe again. The first thing I did after the trial was put the house on the market. The real estate agent told me I could get a premium price for a historic home in Lincoln Park, but I told her I didn't care about the profit. I just wanted it gone. I could not sleep in a house that echoed with the memories of betrayal. I could not walk into the kitchen without seeing the ghost of Brent smashing plates or the ghost of Jasmine pouring poison tea. I sold it to a nice young couple who promised to renovate it. I hoped they would paint over the history. I hoped they would fill the rooms with new laughter that would drown out the old screams. I took the money from the sale along with the $50 million from the recovered crypto wallet, and I created the Lucinda King Foundation. But before I could move on, there was one final task I had to complete. I went back to the high-security storage facility downtown. I walked into Unit 309 for the last time. The servers were still humming. The blue lights were still blinking. It was a monument to my wife's genius and her rage. I sat down at the glass desk. I opened the master file. There were 36 videos in the folder. 35 of them were weapons. They were tools of destruction designed to tear down the people who had hurt us. They had served their purpose. I selected all of them. I hovered my finger over the delete key. It felt strange to destroy the only thing I had left of her voice, but I knew she would not want me to live in the past. She would not want me to spend my remaining years watching reruns of our tragedy. I pressed delete. The screen flashed. The files vanished. The server drive spun down into silence, but I had kept one. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small thumb drive. I had saved Video 0. It was not part of the revenge plan. It was a file I had found hidden deep in the system directory labeled simply for Vic. I plugged the drive into the laptop. I pressed play. Lucinda appeared on the screen. She was not sick in this one. She was sitting in our garden wearing her sun hat. The timestamp was from 5 years ago, long before the cancer, long before the betrayal. She was laughing at something off camera. "Happy birthday, old man," she said, her eyes crinkling with joy. "I know you hate being on camera, but I wanted to record this so you never forget how much I love you. We have built a good life, Vic. No matter what happens, don't ever forget that. You are my rock." I watched the video 3 times. I let the sound of her laughter fill the cold room. This was the Lucinda I wanted to remember. Not the vengeful mastermind, but the woman who loved jazz and gardening and me. I ejected the drive and put it in my breast pocket right next to my heart. I stood up and turned off the lights. I walked out of Unit 309 and I did not look back. 6 months later, the snow had melted and Chicago was blooming with tulips and daffodils. I sat on a bench outside the newly opened Lucinda King Center for Elder Advocacy. The building was bustling with activity. Inside, there were lawyers helping seniors review their wills to prevent fraud. There were social workers checking on isolated retirees. There were engineers like me volunteering to fix heating systems and install security locks for people who could not afford them. I was no longer just a retired engineer. I was the director of operations. I spent my days ensuring that no other elderly person would ever be discarded like trash by their own family. I spent my days giving people the tools to fight back. A young woman walked out of the center holding the arm of her grandmother. They were smiling. The grandmother waved at me. "Thank you, Mr. King," she called out. "You saved my house." I waved back. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the sun. It was the warmth of purpose. I thought my life was over when Brent kicked me out of that car. I thought I was just a piece of debris waiting to be swept away. But I learned that dignity is not something your family gives you. It is something you build yourself, brick by brick. I took out my phone. I opened the comments section of the video I had posted sharing my story with the world. Thousands of people from across the globe had written to me. They shared their own stories of betrayal and resilience. They called me a hero. I am not a hero. I am just a man who kept a promise to his wife. I looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant blue, the same color as the dress Lucinda wore on our first date. "I made it, Lucinda," I whispered. "I am okay." I stood up and buttoned my coat. There was work to do. There was a leak in the roof of the community hall that needed my attention. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to tomorrow. If you are listening to this story and you feel like you are alone or that you are too old to fight back, I want you to remember one thing. The people who underestimate you are giving you your greatest weapon. Let them think you are weak. Let them think you are finished, and then show them that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. My name is Victor King, and I am just getting started. This experience taught me that family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins, but by who would bleed for you. For years, I thought that endurance was a form of love, but I learned that allowing someone to mistreat you is not love, it is self-destruction. We often fear being alone more than we fear being betrayed. But I have discovered that solitude with dignity is far richer than a crowded room full of lies. No matter your age or your circumstances, it is never too late to demand respect. You are the architect of your own value, and once you realize that no one can ever take it away from you again. If my story gave you the strength to stand up for yourself today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience. I read every single message, so please tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. Thank you for listening, and remember to always keep your head high.